Zaczniemy od globalnego spojrzenia na katolicką naukę społeczną i na swoisty również dekalog, nie tylko dla Polski, ale również dla Kościoła i dla Europy. Chcemy, aby w tej pierwszej części naszymi przewodnikami było 3 wybitnych specjalistów, którzy zajmują się katolicką nauką społeczną, którzy bądź teoretycznie, bądź praktycznie wcielają zasady katolickiej nauki społecznej w życie. Jako pierwszy zabierze głos nasz szczególny gość, ksiądz kardynał Turkson, prefekt dykasterii do spraw integralnego rozwoju człowieka w Watykanie. Ksiądz kardynał pochodzi z Gany, mianowany biskupem został w 1992 roku. Był najpierw arcybiskupem Cape Coast do roku 2009. Od roku 2017 jest prefektem tejże dykasterii. Dykasterii, do której kompetencji należą sprawy dotyczące migracji, potrzebujących, chorych i wyłączonych, zmarginalizowanych i ofiar konfliktów zbrojnych oraz katastrof naturalnych. Punktem zainteresowania tej kongregacji są również więźniowie, bezrobotni oraz ofiary niewolnictwa i tortur. Ponadto ta dykasteria ma utrzymywać ścisłe więzi z Papieską Akademią Nauk Społecznych oraz sprawować nadzór nad działalnością Caritas Internationalis i katolickimi dziełami charytatywnymi. Powitajmy więc księdza kardynała, który w tej chwili zabierze głos, wygłaszając do nas swój referat na temat misji Kościoła w dzisiejszej Europie i jego wizję Europy. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Cardinal, Jewish asked me what I was going to speak in Polish, and I said I would try. Out of great respect for your language, I studied in the past with some Polish students in the United States, but they didn't teach me the real good words. So Your Eminence, Your Excellency, my Lord Archbishops and Bishops, distinguished invited guests, members of the different universities, and all of you dear students, I bring you greetings from the Pontifical for the Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development, and on its behalf, we wish this conference great success. Our gathering this morning, as has been announced already, is to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the restoration of independence and statehood to the Republic of Poland, Polonia Restituita. After more than 120 years of brutal subjugation of the Polish state by the 3 so-called Polish divisions put into action by Russia, by Prussia, and by Austria in 1772, 1793, and 1795. The truth is this: it was not just or simply the division of Poland, it was actually the extinguishing of Poland because it marked the end of the Polish state and, in a certain sense, also the end of the Polish nation. So, for example, as a nation, the Polish state adopted a constitution on the 3rd of May, 1791, which began with a remarkable invocation of the triune God. But all of these, the state and the constitution, would end tragically as few years thereafter, the Polish state would suffer a brutal and a bloody massacre of men and women in the suppression of the Polish revolt in Varsavia in January 1863. And again, from Nazism during and after the German occupation of Poland in 1939. So let us recall, in this sense, the classic definition of a state by St. Augustine in his great book, De Civitate Dei. There, referring to the Genesis account of the murder of Abel by Cain, St. Augustine underlines the necessity of a status justitiae after the assassination of Abel by Cain, because that episode unleashed complete anarchy. And so, according to this original insight of St. Augustine, a minimum guarantee of a minimal state of minimal justice is the ultimate goal of every state. For the purpose and the goal of the state is nothing else than the welfare of its citizens as persons, and in this regard, every person as a bearer of inalienable dignity and an inherent beauty of the soul. In other words, the state per se has no value without the human person, the bearer of dignity. But on the other hand, the existence of a person is also inconceivable without the state. Without the state, as St. Augustine argued, the person is nothing, because the person would be living under and among an anarchic situation of a gang of robbers. And this is not possible. And so, on account of this unity of reciprocal relationship between state and person, the extinction of the state and the nation is quickly followed by the extinction of the human person itself. Accordingly, the security of every human person, especially the weak, the unborn, the needy, is the purpose and the raison d'etre of a good state, which must be more than just a gang of robbers. So against this background, my dear friends, the celebration of the Jubilee of 100 years of Polonia Restituta cannot be only a restoration of a single nation, but indeed has to be considered within the context of the restoration of the human being or the human person itself, but especially in this regard also the restoration of Europe. And so in 1919, Poland was reborn. And in 1957, Europe would also be reborn. Precisely on the 25th of March, 1957, on the Capitol Hill in Rome. There, on the Capitol Hill in Rome, is so-called the Treaty of Rome, 6 founding states, only 6 founding states signed into existence a restored Europe. It was hoped that Europe reborn would be the restoration of the old Christian Europe of Emperor Charlemagne, who was crowned and anointed on the Christmas 800 AD in St. Peter's Basilica by Pope Leo III, to inaugurate a holy empire of Christian humanism and of guaranteed dignity of the human person. This period ended tragically on the 6th of August, 1806, with the abdication of Emperor Francis II in Vienna under pressure from Napoleon. So the founding fathers of the new state of Europe, known very popularly among you, de Gasperi, Schumann, Adenauer, and sometimes even Jean Monnet of France, began this new project. It was not by chance that they were all Christian Catholic laymen, and thinking in the famous tradition of the Holy Empire of Augustinian tradition of a balance between church and state. It was also not by chance that the realization of this new idea of Europe reborn, or the European community, on the 25th of March 1957 on the Capitol Hill in Rome, would bear a flag with 12 stars. And this is the interesting thing. It was only 6 states that guarded, but the flag bore 12 stars. And we can probably try to understand the vision of all of this, especially since everything that was happening was influenced strongly by Christian humanism. So the date was March 25th. March 25th, however, is a feast in the Catholic Church of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel told Mary about the birth of Jesus. So a lot then understand this as, since the birth of Jesus had Mary say yes to God's plan, and by saying yes to God's plan, overturned what had happened in paradise with Eve, 25th of March signaled for the new project of Europe Reborn, a new era of acceptance of divine presence and will in the new state. So it's as if renewed or restored Europe was going to be like a paradise refound. Then, in the flag of this new refound Europe, there were 12 stars. The 12 stars also may invite us to look at the book of Apocalypse, book of Revelations, chapter 12, where a lady, so Mary, is presented as wearing a crown with 12 stars. And the 12 stars were considered to be the restoration of God's plan and at the end of time. So the restoration of the 12 prophets of the Old Testament fulfilled in the 12 apostles of the New Testament, therefore founding a new state with the proclamation of the gospel. So the project then of the European community or restored Europe was also supposed to be a Europe that was going to be inspired by the proclamation of the gospel by the 12 apostles. Then, the signing of this Treaty of Rome took place on the Capitol Hill, a hill that represents a typology of three hills again in the experience of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and even in ancient Israel. One of the hills was Golgotha, on which God's mercy was revealed in the crucifixion of Jesus. Another hill was Areopagus, in the Greek philosophical tradition, where the Greek philosophical insight and reflection about natural law and goodness was also revealed. And the third hill was the Capitol in Rome, which celebrated the codification of justice against arbitrariness and totalitarianism. So these three hills were symbolized by the Capitol Hill on which the treaty was signed for the restoration of Europe. And it's almost suggesting that the new European project that was about to be born would be guided by a state of law, a state of justice, and the inspiration of Christian tradition and humanism. So after all of this, after the collapse of communism then in Europe in 1989, Poland was restored to its status as a Middle European country as part of this new European project or European community, as a country of European Greek and Christian tradition and civilization. And against this background, the collapse of communism in Europe, Pope John Paul II, Saint Pope John Paul II, would write his famous encyclical Centesimus Annus in 1991, 100 years after the first by Pope Leo XIII. In Centesimus Annus, Saint Pope John Paul II, as it were, was wondering whether the collapse of communism meant that capitalism was the only victor, was the only thing that reigned. And his answer was no. Not unqualified capitalism, but capitalism which had a human face. Capitalism that was integral, that promoted the integral person-centeredness of the human person, and it was a capitalism with a true human face. And for that, one needs a strong state to steer the market and to guide the form of economy. In this regard, both Pope Benedict XVI and now Pope Francis, Benedict XVI in encyclical letters, Deus Caritas, Est Caritas in Veritate, and now Pope Francis in Laudato Si, would uphold the same sense of capitalism as one in the center of which function finance for the promotion of the well-being of the human person. Even private property has a social function which needs to be recognized. And so in this tradition, the sense of invisible hand of Adam Smith, which was supposed to guide capitalism, had to be replaced by a very visible hand in the new European project. And this visible hand in the new European project or the European Community Project were the classical four principles of Catholic social teaching, namely human dignity, that invited us to consider the personhood of every subject, and the fact that only a person bears an inalienable dignity from God. And on account of this, there was solidarity as not a vague sense of compassion, but as again St. Pope John Paul II would put it, as a virtue which makes one commit to the well-being of another person. Then there will be subsidiarity, according to which all societies of a superior order must adopt attitudes of help, subsidium, towards those of inferior order to promote their well-being. And these two, solidarity and subsidiarity, were supposed to be the scope for the development of the dignity of every human person. Then finally, there was the principle of the common good, understood again not as a gross national product or gross domestic product, but as a guarantee of personal, familial, and associative good. And here in Poland, this was the realization of Solidarność, the promotion of associative good, when a group of people will come together to pursue what is their good. The common good of every person in a human community is therefore the fundamental right to life and to the full realization of people. So, my dear friends, these four basic principles or values are the fruits of Christian humanism, which will be the heritage of Europe restored, or the restoration of Europe. And they must also be seen as the content of the mission of the church in Europe. For it is only in these values that we have a clear and a strong vision of European future. So going towards a restored Europe does not mean going back towards paradise. No. It means going forward to the vision of restoration that enables Europe to reinstate and pursue the search for the dignity of every person, providing for it all the subsidiary support of solidarity in recognition of the pursuit of their common good. The human person then does not have priority over the human person does have priority over the collective and over the state, but the fact is also that the human person alone is not sufficient. He needs the support of a state of law, a state of justice, and a state that recognizes the rights of its individual citizens. It is only aside that the symbiosis between person and state, dignity of a person, justice of a state, have to promote the well-being of the individual. And these would underlie the Christian humanism which directs the new vision or the new project of Europe restored, within which we locate and establish also Poland restored. So with this sense of Christianism quickly and shortly presented as such, let us now turn briefly to look at the three popes who and how they pursue the vision of this for Europe. Briefly, on account of time, I'll limit the survey of all of this because there's a lot of documents and speeches in which the popes talk about their sense of the vision of Christian humanism. Briefly then, on the 6th of May, 2016, as you may remember, in the Sublime Sala Regia in the Vatican, the Charlemagne Prize was awarded to Pope Francis. In his acceptance speech, Pope Francis asked these following questions. What has happened to you, humanist Europe? What has happened to you, the champion of human rights? What has happened to you, Europe of democracy and freedom? What has happened to you, Europe, land of poets, philosophers, artists, musicians, and writers? What has happened to you, Europe, mother of peoples and nations, mother of great men and women who knew how to defend and give their lives for the dignity of their brothers? Now, the primary reference was certainly to the founders of the European project, Christian Democrats, De Gasperi, Adenauer, Schumann, Monet, as observed above, who against the horrors of totalitarianism and war started the idea of Europe as a unity in diversity, as a dynamic identity in dialogue with the other. Accordingly, in the case of Poland, 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Pope spoke of a Europe capable of giving birth to a new humanism based on three capacities, namely the ability to integrate, the capacity to dialogue, and the ability to generate. These were identified to be the new characteristic features of Europe that was coming together. Ability to integrate, capacity to dialogue, and the ability to generate, bringing the different states together. Here is the humanism of which the popes have written a lot. And it is a new humanism as a cultural setting and, I would say, a mindset that was supposed to guide the social and political vision of a united Europe as a community of family states. And so, Pope Benedict, and he said a lot of things, he at one point referred to Europe, which was forgetting Christian roots, as Europe which was becoming an apostate. And then he has a question, we need to build the European common house with expectation of the citizens. And so Pope Benedict XVI very often called for a new humanism for the third millennium, using an expression he often linked to the role of universities, which incidentally were also born from within the church. One of the clearest definitions of this new humanism was from the son of this land, from St. John Paul II, who, speaking to the Catholic University professors on October 4, 2001, said the following: "It is embodied in the ability to show that the word of faith is indeed a force that illuminates knowledge. It frees it from all servitude. It makes it capable of good." Then John Paul II went on, "The young generations expect from you a new synthesis of knowledge, not simply encyclopedic, but humanistic knowledge. It is necessary then to overcome the dispersion that disorients and outline rather open profiles, able to motivate their commitment of research and communication of knowledge, and at the same time to train people so that they do not end up turning against man, the immense, tremendous possibilities of science and technological development and growth." This would be an humanism with a theistic faith, would not be an atheistic humanism, but will be a humanism inspired by faith. As at the beginning of humanity, even today, when the human person wants to have the fruits of the tree of knowledge as his own will, independently of God, he ends up finding himself a sad operator of fear, of war, and confrontation with death. Therefore, we're not looking for humanism without God. We're looking for humanism whose search for knowledge is inspired by faith, so that man does not turn against himself and use the instruments of technology against the life of other human beings. And so, as a church, we do have a role also to play. We overcome all borders. For the church, according to St. Benedict, the church is itself a unity in diversity, a symbol for Europe and its gathering of different states into one community. But to recreate a European ideal that does not defeat the different stories and the different past of members, but rather articulate them as open stories, not surrounded by walls, it is necessary to recreate a hope, which today, also due to our fault, is means sometime for Europe simmering under its own ashes. Without hope, the church itself has no historical meaning, because Christianity is the hope of salvation. So a very beautiful trajectory is offered in this regard again by Pope Francis, who on the 25th of December 2014 in Strasbourg, speaking to the European parliamentarians, said the following: "How then can we give hope and future to Europe, so that starting from the young generations, we find confidence to pursue the great ideal of a united and peaceful and creative enterprise in Europe, respectful of rights and aware of its duties?" To answer this question, let us refer to an image. These days, a lot of people travel and a lot of them visit Rome, they visit the museum in the Vatican and all of that. So in one of these visits, it's possible for any visitor here, probably you've seen it before, or probably you'll see it in the future. One of the famous Raffaella frescoes found in the Vatican depicts the so-called School of Athens. At the center of the fresco is the image of Plato and Aristotle. The first with his finger pointing upwards, towards the sky, towards the world of ideas, and we could say towards transcendence and the metaphysical part of the human person. The other one has his finger pointing down, towards the earth, towards the reality of human experiences. And when we put the two together, we can probably then say that it is when only the two come together that they succeed in creating a very useful and livable environment for the human person. The metaphysics or the metaphysical and the earthly need to come together. This, in fact, is the symbiosis that creates the humanism of Europe or the European community. So the image describes very well Europe and its history, made of the continuous encounter between heaven and earth, where the sky indicates the openness to transcendence, to God, which has characterized the European man. And the earth represents its practical, concrete ability to deal with situations and problems. So the future of Europe depends on the rediscovery of the vital and inseparable link between these two elements, the heavenly and the earthly. This is important because the dominant discourse that we hear also is the thing about secularism. That seems to push for the separation of the two. But Europe's future has not laid in the separation between the two, but rather in the encounter between the heavenly and the earthly. And this is what the humanistic spirit of the European project represents. And therefore, let me conclude with the words of St. John Paul II again, who in the same speech to which I referred to previously urges that, for you, when the new humanism is a perspective and a project and a commitment, it will then become a vocation. To this high vocation and standard, you are now called at the beginning of this new millennium to pursue the standard of Christian humanistic Europe that is humanistic and that is Christian. And I'd like to thank you for your kind attention.